Democratic socialism has for the last 100 years been pretty much a fringe belief, even on the left. Now, open socialists are all of a sudden running for office across the United States, and they are winning Democratic primaries. Today on The View, Joy Behar started an argument when she declared her support for this ideology. Here's part of it.
On your tax form, I think you should start paying the amount of taxes that every socialist in this country thinks you need to.
They have just given this enormous tax break to the very, very wealthy in this country. That tax break doesn't have to be so generous to those really rich people, does it? Because if you don't give that money to them, what happens to that money? Better schools, better post office,
I'm sorry,
better garbage pickup, better police department, better fire
the government is so good at running things, then the post office is a great run business.
One more word.
The VA, some of us do not want socialism to be normalized in this country.
I am an example. Wait, can I finish?
70% of taxes.
Behar did not release her own tax return, so we could see how many deductions she took. We're awaiting that. Meanwhile, Jeff Weaver managed Bernie Sanders' presidential campaign. He's the author of the book, How Bernie Won, Inside the Revolution That Is Taking Back Our Country and Where We Go From Here. Jeff Weaver joins us tonight. Jeff, thanks a lot for coming on.
Hey, Tucker, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
So you just did an interview and were asked basically, what is this creed? What is democratic socialism? And you described basically a series of economic beliefs. Here's what you said. People want economic security. They want health care. They want dignity in old age. They want to know that they're not going to die with nothing. All pretty reasonable sounding ideas. When I listen to and how we pay for them is the point, but we could debate that. But those aren't bad ideas. When I hear modern Democrats talking, it is never about economics. It is about abortion. It is overwhelmingly about immigration and why we need to let people stay here, whether they're legal or not. It is nothing about an agenda of empowering the middle class economically. Why is that?
Well, let me tell you, Tucker, I think Democrats have to start walking and chewing gum at the same time. We do have to talk about the plight of marginalized communities in this country who have been targeted, especially by the president during his administration. But we also have to talk about the economic needs of people in every zip code in this country. You know, wages are stagnant. People are anxious about their futures, about their kids' futures, about taking care of their aging parents, about affording college. And we have to talk about all of these issues, frankly. And I agree with you that we need to hear more conversation.
But there's only there's only so much time in the day. There's only so much attention. There's really only so much our system can digest. And if your fixation is with esoteric sexual politics like transgender bathrooms
or plastic straws on Fox, I mean, I was just watching how many shows on plastic straws are you going to have here on Fox? I mean, how relevant is that to people's lives?
We did one. We do a lot of segments on economics because I think it's really important. So, like the elites
I would not call that a core economic issue, Tucker.
Well, I wouldn't either. No. Yeah. Well, I'm not claiming it was. We do a lot of segments on core economic issues, including this one. But I'm just interested, like your elites never say anything about how inviting millions of poor people into the country every year might depress wages for the working class.
Well, we're not talking about inviting in millions of people. The truth of the matter is that we do have millions of people in this country living in the shadows who are working hard. Many of them, in fact, are paying taxes. Their kids are in schools. They're contributing to our country. And I think we have to recognize that reality. That's for sure. But let's talk about the core economic issues. You wanted to talk about the quote-unquote democratic socialism. I know people on Fox love the scary labels and the red baiting, but let's talk about what that means. Overwhelmingly popular.
Wait, stop. I'm actually giving you the fairest possible shake you would get on any channel ever. I'm taking your ideas seriously. I'm not mocking you.
Sure.
I just am wondering if your ideas aren't on a collision course with the agenda set by the elites in your party. And you know as well as I do, the answer is yes. They're incompatible. What you're saying is not compatible with what they're saying, and you know it.
What I am saying is that we need a Democratic Party in this country, and we need a government in this country that represents the needs of ordinary people, and that includes an agenda that guarantees health care to all people, that pays people a living wage, that pays equally whether you're a man or a woman, that protects our environment, that gives people opportunity to go to college and to have a good life. That's what I'm talking about. People not retiring in poverty, destroying Social Security. These are the things that people are talking about in the progressive movement. And frankly, Tucker, if you look at the polling, it's wildly popular.
No, but they're not talking. But okay, I agree with a lot of what you just said. What you said that is not true at all is that that's what they're talking about. They're not. They're talking about race. They're talking about sex. They're talking about identity politics. They're attacking people because of their skin color. I mean, I do this for a living. I know exactly what they're saying.
Well, let's
and they're not saying what you just said.
For their skin color, because I think we go right to the White House where that starts. Frankly, my friend.
But let's be real. I mean, honestly, every time I talk to progressive, it's like, oh, white man, this. It's like, what does that have to do with empowering the average person economically, which is what the agenda ought to be?
We have got to empower people of all races in this country, frankly.
Exactly.
And you cannot ignore the intersection of race and gender and other things. I mean, you're a smart guy. I'm not on Hannity here. This is a real show, and you can't ignore those. You can't ignore those issues. But you are right.
I'm not ignoring the issues, but But the children in your party who are clearly in charge are all about. I mean, do you personally, as a pretty serious guy, I guess a serious guy, get a little tired of having to follow like inflamed upper middle class college students who are constantly yelping about identity politics? Don't you think that's kind of a distraction from like the adult issues, or no?
Well, no, I think you're creating a false dichotomy here. There are important issues that are both issues of identity, and there are important issues of economics. And I think we have to speak to both. And people in the Democratic Party who advocate just one or the other, I'm constantly in conflict with those people who think that we only have to talk about one side of this, two-sided coin. We have to talk about these important issues that affect marginalized communities, and we have to talk about laying out an economic agenda that is going to uplift people of all races in every zip code in this country. That's the mission in front of us. And if you look at Bernie Sanders' historic campaign in 2016. He overwhelmingly won independent voters in the Democratic primary process, including in places that were very, very red, because folks understood that he was standing with their families in their everyday struggles. And that's what we as Democrats and progressives have to do.
I'm kind of aware of that. I just think, here's where I disagree with you, we got to go, but I would just say in one sentence, I think the identity politics people are beating you. And I hope I'm wrong.
Well, I think anyway, with Jeff, people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and others, we're winning.
I think she's on the identity politics side. But come back. We can talk about it. Sorry, we're out of time. Jeff Weaver, thank you. Well, it's not getting a ton of attention, but we seem to be moving incrementally toward war with Iran. Maybe we should talk about it first. Is it a good idea? We'll take an in-depth look at that next. Well, with all the screeching recently about Vladimir Putin and Russia and treason, it's been easy to miss the real news. We have some real news. The United States is inching closer, apparently, to some kind of conflict with Iran. This Sunday, the president tweeted this, quote, to Iranian President Rouhani, never, ever threaten the United States again, or you will suffer the consequences, the likes of which few throughout history have ever suffered before. We are no longer a country that will stand for your demented words of violence and death. Be cautious! Exclamation point. Well, the interesting thing about this tweet is what didn't happen. The press is usually quick to jump on the president's intemperate tweets. CNN has apparently an entire team of progressive teenagers devoted to monitoring his feed. But this time, there wasn't much comment from the media. Why? Because if there's one thing Washington loves more than open borders and fat lobbying contracts, it's pointless wars half a world away. Contractors get rich, neocon intellectuals feel powerful. Bill Kristol, Max Boot, and Nancy Pelosi agree on one thing: war is good as long as the war does not help the United States. John Bolton finds himself in that camp. A lifelong neocon, Bolton repeatedly has called for toppling the Iranian government again and again, though tellingly he's never suggested what might replace the Iranian government once it's toppled. Now that he's national security advisor, he has been changing our policies. The U.S., for example, has begun promoting protests within Iran in an effort to overthrow the regime there. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo appears to be on board with this. UN Ambassador Nikki Haley definitely is. Here's a recent sampling of her saber-rattling on Iran. Watch.
Their government has a long history of murdering its own people who dare to speak the truth.
The Iranian regime is now on notice. The world will be watching what you do.
If you want to come to the table and work on a new Iran deal, we'll be right there to talk to you. But you're not going to threaten us to do it.
Iran may have messed with the wrong president here.
They absolutely did.
Now, some of that is bluster, obviously, but some of it is exactly what it looks like, the groundwork for conflict. We are moving toward, however slowly, some kind of confrontation with Iran. Now, that should worry everybody, but it should especially be of concern to anyone who supported the president. If President Trump decides to go to war with Iran, it will destroy his presidency, just as the Iraq War destroyed the presidency of his Republican predecessor, George W. Bush. Attacking Iran is not like intervening in Libya or Syria, or even like invading Iraq. It entails far greater risk and much higher costs. Geographically, Iran is about 4 times the size of Iraq. It has 3 times as many people as Iraq had when we invaded. Iraq was a divided country along religious lines. Iran is not. It's cohesive. It's a much richer country, too, with a military that has spent many years preparing for a U.S. invasion. It's a formidable force. In 2002, the U.S. military carried out a war game that was widely understood to be a simulation of an invasion of Iran. It went badly. America suffered more than 20,000 casualties in a single day, and officials halted the game. So the question is not, could America beat Iran? Yes, it could. The question is it ready to try? Well, less ready than ever, actually. Compared to 2003, our country is deeper in debt and far more politically divided than it's been since the Civil War. Our military is overstretched, ask anyone in it. Meanwhile, China is much stronger than it was 15 years ago. You can bet the Chinese military will be more assertive than ever when we're tied down in yet another quagmire. Does anyone outside of Washington actually support a new war in Iran? Well, the Saudi royal family does. So do the leaders of other Sunni Gulf states. They see Iran as their greatest rival, and they'd love to have America fight a war against Iran for them. Why wouldn't they? President Trump's own supporters know better than this, though. You'll remember that back in 2016, during the Republican primary debate in South Carolina, Donald Trump was the only person on that stage to call the Iraq War a mistake. He vowed never to repeat anything like that and promised that if elected, he would act only in America's interests. Now, the morons handicapping the debate on television predicted Trump would lose. It was over. Saying that had sealed his fate. And of course, they were wrong, and he won. Republican voters agreed with him, it turned out. They had a better sense of the truth. A lot of their kids were serving in the military. 2.5 years later, amazingly, the president's advisors are telling him he must abandon that promise. Iran is too important, they say. It's the greatest threat this country faces, despite the fact that virtually every terror attack in America has been inspired not by Iran, but by Iran's Sunni enemies. Doesn't matter. The mullahs are months away from building a nuke, the neocons tell us. Keep in mind, these people have been saying the exact same thing, word for word, for more than a decade. You can look it up on Google. They have no idea what they're talking about. Their track records are embarrassing, disaster after disaster. They ought to be selling timeshares in Maui or doing something useful. Instead, they have more political power than they've ever had. Amazingly, almost to a person, this same group bitterly opposed the president they now work for. They repeatedly attacked him in public, and they attacked him savagely in private. They consider his ideas absurd to this day. They regard the notion of putting America first as morally offensive. They are fully on Bill Kristol's team. In fact, just last week, Kristol was encouraging Nikki Haley to challenge her boss, Donald Trump, for the Republican nomination 2 years from now, in a way that makes sense. If there was ever a swamp in Washington, you are looking at it, the foreign policy establishment. They are working overtime to ensnare the president in a mess in Iran. Let's hope that he understands exactly what's going on. Douglas McGregor is a retired Army colonel, author of the book Margin of Victory, a frequent guest on the show, and he joins us tonight. Colonel McGregor, thank you very much for coming on.
Thanks, Tucker. I appreciate it.
So I can't help, since I've been in Washington for 30 years, notice that the very people who are pushing this new entanglement, this new enterprise, are the Trump administration's gravest enemies on almost every subject. And they are also the same people who predicted outcomes that never came to pass. In other words, they've been wrong again and again and again and again. How do these people still have power?
Well, look, I think President Trump lost control of the whole appointment process and staffing the government shortly after the election. I don't know the details, but he ended up appointing large numbers of people who subsequently brought in their friends, almost all of whom were opposed to Donald Trump and his agenda. But I think it's important to say something about the president's comment, because the president's right. If you look at the Iranian defense establishment, we spend more money on one Ford-class aircraft carrier than Iran spends on its entire military establishment. So if there were a war, it would be a very one-sided affair. But the problem is that wars don't work that way. They tend to move in directions that no one anticipated. Suddenly, people that you would think would otherwise avoid conflict might decide that it's not in their interest to see Iran destroyed. And I'm thinking of Russia, and I'm thinking of China as perfect examples. Why would they stand by and watch us pulverize Iran? It seems very unlikely. So I think President Trump understands that. In fact, this afternoon when he talked to the VFW, he made the comment that he pulled out of the deal with Iran, but he's open to another deal. He's open to talking, to negotiating. He's talked to the Russians and he's talked to the North Koreans. That seems to have had a positive impact, certainly in Northeast Asia. We don't know what will happen in the future, but I think that's a good sign. So I think dealing with Donald Trump, understand that anyone who threatens the United States with this man in the White House should seek psychiatric care. They're crazy because Donald Trump means what he says. He will fight to defend the United States. On the other hand, I don't see any evidence that he's interested in precipitating a conflict.
Do you think the advisors around him, whose comments we just played, Nikki Haley, for example, or John Bolton, I mean, they seem to come at this with pre-existing agendas.
Well, of course, but the good news is that President Trump hasn't listened very much to his advisors. If he did, we would never have made any progress on the Korean Peninsula. We would not be working with the Chinese. We would never have met with Vladimir Putin. So God bless the president. He doesn't listen to these people. So I'm not too worried about that. The thing that does worry me, though, given some of the comments that are being made, is this red meat on the table for the war lobby. You and I know that there are a lot of people who would welcome conflict with Iran. That's obvious. I think the president needs to watch carefully for the potential for something like the Gulf of Tonkin incident. Many of your viewers may not remember that. It never happened. And we could very well be treated to something like that in the Gulf. We should watch for that. And this is an example of President Trump's comments on fake news. He should not be sabotaged by fake news.
I agree. We've seen it happen twice in Syria, twice. Colonel, thank you very much. Great to see you.
Thank you, Tucker.
One activist says conservatives only want Planned Parenthood to be defunded in order to force the nation's women to get pregnant. It's a confusing argument. We're going to allow her to explain it next.